Ethan was a bright 10-year-old boy, always curious about the world around him. He lived with his mother, Sarah, in a small apartment in the heart of the city. Life wasn't always easy for them, but they made the best of what they had. Sarah worked long hours to provide for Ethan, and though they didn't have much, they had each other. One afternoon, after school, Ethan and his mum were walking home, enjoying their usual conversation about his day. The streets were busy as always, filled with people rushing around. But something caught Ethan's eye. An elderly man stood just ahead, struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags. He was moving slowly, each step a visible effort. Without thinking twice, Ethan nudged his mother's arm. "Mum, that man needs help," Ethan said, his voice soft but full of concern. Sarah glanced over and nodded. "You're right, Ethan. Let's go see if we can help him." They walked over, and Ethan, with his bright smile, approached the man. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like some help with your bags?" he asked, his voice kind and respectful. The old man looked down at Ethan, surprised by the boy's offer. His face softened, and a small smile appeared. "Thank you, young man. I could really use some help," he replied, his voice a little shaky but full of gratitude. Ethan carefully took one of the bags, and his mother took the other. Together, they walked the man to his apartment, which wasn't too far away. The building was old and worn down, with cracked steps and peeling paint, but it was home to the man. As they reached the front door, the old man turned to them. "My name is Mr. Jacobs," he said, his eyes warm. "I can't thank you both enough for your kindness. Please, if you're ever in the neighborhood again, stop by and say hello." Ethan nodded eagerly, happy to have helped. "It was no problem, Mr. Jacobs. I'll come visit you sometime." With that, they said their goodbyes, and Ethan and his mother continued their walk home. As they made their way down the street, Sarah smiled at her son. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You have such a kind heart," she said, patting his shoulder. Ethan shrugged, a little shy. It just felt like the right thing to do. And with that, the day continued as usual. Little did Ethan know that simple act of kindness was about to lead to something much bigger. A few weeks passed, and Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Jacobs. Something about the old man stayed in his mind. Maybe it was the way he had smiled, or maybe it was how alone he seemed in that worn-down apartment. One Saturday morning, Ethan turned to his mother as they were having breakfast. "Mom, do you think we could visit Mr. Jacobs today? Just to see how he's doing?" Ethan asked, hopeful. Sarah smiled, not surprised by her son's kindness. "Of course, Ethan. Why don't we make him something to bring over? I'm sure he'd appreciate that." Ethan beamed at the idea. Together, they whipped up a batch of fresh cookies and wrapped them up neatly. Then they set off to visit Mr. Jacobs. When they arrived at his apartment and knocked on the door, Mr. Jacobs was surprised to see them, but welcomed them in with a warm smile. "I wasn't expecting visitors today. Please, come in," he said, stepping aside to let them in. As they entered, Ethan looked around the small apartment. It was cluttered but cozy, with an old couch and stacks of books everywhere. But what really caught Ethan's attention were the paintings hanging on the walls. They were beautiful, full of color and emotion. Some were landscapes, while others were portraits, but each one seemed to tell a story. "You painted all of these?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Mr. Jacobs chuckled softly. "Yes, a long time ago. I used to be an artist, you see. Back in the day, I even had my work in some galleries around the city. But that was a lifetime ago." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. "They're amazing. Why don't you still paint?" Mr. Jacobs looked down, a bit of sadness in his eyes. "Oh, well, life gets in the way sometimes. The art world isn't always kind, and over time I just stopped. I figured no one was interested anymore." Ethan shook his head. "But they're incredible. You shouldn't stop." Sarah, who had been quietly listening, chimed in. "Ethan's right. Your talent is something special. It's never too late to pick it up again." Mr. Jacobs smiled, touched by their words. "You're kind to say that." From that day on, Ethan made it a habit to visit Mr. Jacobs regularly. The two quickly became close, spending hours talking about art, life, and everything in between. Mr. Jacobs told Ethan stories about his younger years, how he had once traveled to different cities to showcase his work, but over time, the fame faded, and so did his passion. Ethan listened intently, learning not just about art, but about life's ups and downs. To Ethan, Mr. Jacobs wasn't just an artist, he had become a friend, and more than that, a mentor. As the weeks passed, something began to change in Mr. Jacobs. The light in his eyes returned, and for the first time in years, he picked up his paintbrush again. One sunny afternoon, Ethan and Mr. Jacobs were walking through the park, carrying one of Mr. Jacobs's latest paintings. The elderly man had regained his love for painting thanks to Ethan's encouragement, and today they were going to hang the new artwork in Mr. Jacobs' apartment. As they strolled through the park, enjoying the fresh air, they noticed a man standing nearby, looking intently at the painting in Ethan's hands. He was dressed sharply with a serious expression on his face, and as he approached them, Ethan and Mr. Jacobs exchanged glances. "Excuse me," the man said, nodding toward the painting. "That's quite remarkable. Where did you get that?" Mr. Jacobs, a little taken aback, responded modestly, "Oh, I painted it myself. Just a hobby I've picked up again recently." The man's eyes widened. "You painted this? You've got serious talent. My name's Daniel, and I run an art gallery downtown. I haven't seen work like this in a long time." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Mr. Jacobs is an amazing artist. He has lots of paintings, not just this one." Daniel nodded, still staring at the painting, clearly impressed. "You know, we have an exhibition coming up at the gallery. It's for artists whose work hasn't been in the spotlight recently, people with real talent who have been overlooked. I'd love to showcase your paintings there." Mr. Jacobs stood still for a moment, processing the unexpected offer. His first instinct was to politely decline. The art world had been cruel to him before, and he had almost given up on it entirely. But then he looked down at Ethan, who was beaming with excitement. "You should do it, Mr. Jacobs," Ethan said, his voice full of encouragement. "People need to see your work. You've got a gift." Mr. Jacobs hesitated, but then smiled, feeling the spark of hope reignite. "All right, Daniel, let's do it. I'll bring some of my paintings to your gallery." Ethan couldn't contain his excitement. The thought of seeing Mr. Jacobs' paintings in a real gallery filled him with joy. He knew this was the chance Mr. Jacobs had been waiting for, even if the old man didn't fully realize it yet. As they walked home, Ethan couldn't stop talking about the upcoming exhibition. "You're going to be famous again, Mr. Jacobs. Everyone will see how amazing your art is." Mr. Jacobs smiled warmly at Ethan. "We'll see, Ethan. But even if nothing comes of it, I'm grateful. I wouldn't have picked up that paintbrush again if it weren't for you." The bond between them had grown stronger than ever. Ethan knew this was more than just a gallery showing. It was a second chance for Mr. Jacobs, and he was determined to support him every step of the way. The day of the gallery exhibition arrived, and Mr. Jacobs stood nervously in front of the large building, clutching his portfolio of paintings. Ethan and his mother, Sarah, were right beside him, offering smiles of encouragement. The gallery was buzzing with people, and Mr. Jacobs had never seen such a crowd gathered for an art show in years. "Don't be nervous, Mr. Jacobs," Ethan said with a reassuring grin. "Your art is going to blow everyone away." They stepped inside, and immediately people began to notice Mr. Jacobs' work. The paintings were displayed beautifully on the walls, each one more stunning than the next. Conversations filled the air, and it didn't take long for word to spread. This was the work of a truly gifted artist. The man who had approached them in the park, Daniel, greeted Mr. Jacobs with a smile. "People love your work. This is going to be a great night for you." Throughout the evening, visitors marveled at the vibrant colors and emotion in the paintings. Many wanted to meet the artist behind the work. Mr. Jacobs, who had once felt forgotten by the world, now stood surrounded by admirers. Ethan couldn't stop smiling as he saw how happy this made his friend. By the end of the night, something incredible happened. Almost every painting had been sold. Collectors and art enthusiasts praised Mr. Jacobs, and he had suddenly found himself back in the spotlight. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. After the event, Daniel approached Mr. Jacobs once more, this time holding a small box. "Mr. Jacobs, it's been an honor to showcase your art tonight. You've truly inspired everyone here, but there's someone else who deserves to be recognized as well." He turned to Ethan, who looked up in surprise. "Ethan, without your kindness and belief in Mr. Jacobs, none of this would have happened. So, we wanted to give you something special." Daniel handed Ethan the box, and inside was a beautiful framed painting, one of Mr. Jacobs' favorites. Ethan's eyes widened in awe. "This is for me?" Mr. Jacobs smiled warmly. "Yes, Ethan, you were the one who encouraged me to start painting again. This is my way of saying thank you." Ethan looked up at Mr. Jacobs, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know what to say. This means so much." As they walked home that night, Ethan clutched the painting tightly, feeling a sense of pride and joy. He had helped bring Mr. Jacobs's talent back into the world, and in return, he had received something far more valuable than any reward: friendship, love, and the knowledge that one small act of kindness could change someone's life forever. The next day, Ethan hung the painting on his bedroom wall. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the lessons Mr. Jacobs had taught him. The painting wasn't just a piece of art. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could make a difference in ways he never expected. Subscribe.